On the next World in America, we meet a people hailing from the southern tip of the African continent, the South African Americans. First, we'll get to know their historical trials and tribulations. Later, we'll taste the delicious cuisine of South Africa, known for its diverse flavors. And finally, we'll move and clap to the rhythms of South African Americans uniting in the Big Apple. All coming up on the next episode of World in America. The Republic of South Africa is located on the southernmost tip of the African continent. It neighbors 5 different countries to the north, from Swaziland in the northeast to Namibia in the northwest, the Atlantic and Indian Oceans to the south. It also enclaves the Kingdom of Lesotho. South Africa is a natural beauty, carrying about 1,700 miles of coastline and a gorgeous inland. It attracts about 10 million tourists each year. Currently, its population is around 50 million. There are 11 languages recognized by the Constitution, highlighting South Africa's diversity and rich history.
When we talk about South African history, what we mean is basically when white colonists arrived in South Africa. 1652, they established the Dutch East India Company, which was a private company that ran colonies for the Dutch, for the Netherlands, established a fort in Cape Town on the South African coast. And from there they expanded, so they ruled South Africa from 1652 until 1795. And this is a period that is characterized by slavery, by attempts to deny rights to the indigenous people at that point, the Khoi and the San. Increasingly, the Dutch encroached away from the Cape and into the rest of the country. The British then engaged in a war with the Dutch outside of South Africa. This was called the Anglo-Dutch War of 1795 till 1803. The result of that was that the British occupied the Cape and then took over the Cape from 1806 until 1910. During that period, between 1806 and 1910, there were independent African kingdoms, the Zulus, Sothos, etc. There were also independent Afrikaner republics. These were the now Dutch settlers who had taken on their own identity in South Africa and who objected to the British ending slavery in the Cape. I think it was in 1806, and then later abolishing slavery in 1834. So they established their own republics, the Republic of South Africa, they call it the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek, the Republic of the Orange Free State, and then also one called Natalia. So they engaged in wars with the British. And of course, this was complicated by the discovery of gold and diamonds at the end of the 19th century. And so the British won that war, incorporated these republics, and formed what is known as the Union of South Africa in 1910. What that basically meant was self-government for whites in South Africa. The African National Congress was founded in 1912. They become a mass movement in the 1950s. The government, there's a lot of repression, court cases leading to Nelson Mandela going to Robben Island, many other South African resistance fighters going to Robben Island and other prisons in South Africa. The ANC, as the major movement, goes into exile. And from there, they sort of engage in a political struggle against the South African government. And so in 1990, the leader of South Africa, the last white president of South Africa at that time, unbanned the ANC on the 2nd of February of 1990, which is a momentous day in South African history, released Mandela from prison 9 days later. And then 4 years after that, Mandela becomes the president of South Africa. The first South Africans who came to the United States can be traced to the gold rush in California. So mainly white South Africans came here. In 1960, the white South African government decided to leave the Commonwealth. South Africa at that point was a British colony, so they decided to form a republic. So many whites who didn't agree with that left South Africa. In 1976 was the Soweto uprising by young students outside Johannesburg. So again, a large South African population. So there are, in this case, particularly Jewish South Africans in California, Chicago, Atlanta, etc., and other white South Africans. After 1994, of course, again people leave because of the end of apartheid and the beginning of a democratic government. And so I think some whites didn't feel comfortable being in South Africa. Parallel to the sort of white migration to the United States, there was also black migration, but that black migration was not often of choice. Smaller groups of black South Africans came at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, to study, often at historically black colleges, or at what would be now called liberal arts colleges, so Oberlin in Ohio, Wilberforce University.
Working as a professor of international affairs at the New School in New York City, Dr. Sean Jacobs is one of the many South Africans who migrated to the States after the end of the apartheid.
Since '94, of course, the borders are open, young people, they want to see the world. I think I'm a product of that, where I grew up under apartheid. I didn't benefit from apartheid, but of course, now that the world is open, I'm also seeing an opportunity to go live somewhere else, experience the world. I came to the United States the first time in 1995 as a student, a Fulbright scholar at Northwestern University outside Chicago. I like places like New York City, the multiculturalism of Brooklyn, the freedom to think and say, and also the access to resources to learn. Like universities here are very well endowed, and being a professor or being academic, it's very well supported here. Universities are in a crisis in other parts of the world, in Africa in general, and also in parts of South Africa. So, being in the US and having access to resources, I think that's definitely an attraction for people to come here. If one wants to talk about some of the challenges that South Africans face when they move to the United States, I would say firstly, there's a legal context, which is South Africans, they need visas to come to the United States. Unlike if they go to Britain, and I know that the law is changing with regard to Britain, it's not as easy to get a work permit to be in the US. So you would come here maybe as a visitor, which means you can't work. And South Africans are also very social. So in a world where where it's, particularly in big cities where it's more atomized, or in the suburbs where people never talk and despite the fact that the townships where people are poor and life is violent, but there's a lot of interaction between people. Life is very social, and to come to a place where you never see people on the street, if you end up in an American city in the Midwest, or in a commuter city, New York is maybe an exception, but I think if you end up in those cities, it's harder to relate to people, and to maintain relationships with people.
You don't have to travel all the way to South Africa to sample this delicious cuisine. Braai South African Restaurant is located in the Hell's Kitchen district of Manhattan, providing a great opportunity to open up our palates to a variety of South African delicacies.
Well, the word braai actually comes from a South African word meaning barbecue or grill. Braai it's more than just a pastime in South Africa, it's a way of life. It's a way for people to share hospitality, and for friends and family to gather together and cook great food in a very relaxed environment. Africa in general has a diverse spectrum of wildlife, so what tends to kind of influence our cuisine a lot is these animals, and just the preparation of very kind of simple everyday ingredients in a very unique way with a unique series of spices.
The first South African delicacy we'll check out is the pan-seared ostrich fillet, otherwise known to braai customers as the African Roadrunner.
Ostrich is a very popular dish in South Africa. It's a very lean style meat. It doesn't have a lot of fat, so therefore it's great for health-conscious individuals, and also it gives a nice gamey approach to the meat instead of just conventional beef. So he prepares it with fresh coriander, thyme, and a mix of the pepper and different spices. Little roasted garlic, some olive oil. Green beans with some grilled onions.
A little bit of
Salt.
While the ostrich receives a hearty grill treatment, the base vegetables and herbs are mixed and sautéed lightly.
We add a little bit of mango nectar for the sauce.
peri peri.
We add now peri peri, which is a unique chili-based spice that is Portuguese of origin and is widely known throughout the eastern coast of Africa. We then add fresh blackberries to augment the ostrich tenderness with a little fruit profile as well. Again, a little basil. This dish comes on a bed of curried mashed potato. And then the sauce is added over just to cover and bathe the steak in a lovely, rich, fruit-based sauce.
The dish not to be missed in the Braai South African restaurant is a yummy sausage dish called boerewors.
South Africa was actually discovered by European powers in the 16th century as a way, looking for a way to the east for spices. And so our major influences in our cuisine are based on colonial powers, European countries, foreign immigrants, and indigenous African cultures. So we have almost a melting pot of different cultures. We're going to prepare the boerewors. Boerewors is a South African style farmer's sausage. It's prepared primarily with beef. It's grilled on the flame for just a little bit. It's prepared with what's called pap and a rich tomato gravy. Simple, just fresh tomatoes, caramelized onions, and a little salt and pepper. It has a rich gravy-like texture on top of the sausage, which then comes with, like I said, with pap. Pap is a corn-based polenta. It's very popular in South Africa amongst the African tribes, as well as with all South Africans. We choose to add a little whole corn grains to our pap, just to give it a nice little bit of color. You have three great-looking ingredients put together in a very simple way. This is how South Africans choose to do it. We have a large European influence in our cuisine and in terms of the way we enjoy our food. So nothing that would be out of the ordinary from your traditional holidays, and just really any occasion where it just calls for people coming together and enjoying each other's company and just great food.
Highlighting one of the many Asian influence in South African cuisine is the wholesome Cape Malay bobotie.
Cape Malay bobotie. This is a traditional Malaysian dish, very popular in the Western Cape of South Africa. It's a curry-based dish. It has ground meats. It can be any kind of ground meat with caramelized onion. It has an egg-based topping. It's prepared ahead of time and put in the oven for about 20 minutes just to reheat and serve. It's served with a yellow basmati or Indian rice, and then often served with a side of sambals or small relish-like condiments. South Africa not only offers fantastic cuisine, the country itself is incredibly beautiful. And I think the people of South Africa, they call us the Rainbow Nation, is because we really are a diverse spectrum of colors and cultures. And we put that into everything that we do, and from our food to our lifestyle.
No overview of any cuisine would be complete without topping it off with a delicious sweet dessert dish. And the South African malva pudding does the job perfectly.
We're going to prepare a traditional South African dessert called malva pudding. The dish traditionally comes on with a custard or a heavy cream bath, if you like, that we put the dish into. It's a sponge-like cake pudding that has a lot of apricot jam in it. It has a light custard, like I said, and it's one of our favorite dishes at the restaurant. It's topped off with a lychee, which is an exotic fruit from India and widely grown in South Africa as well. With a little mint leaf and touch of strawberry, a little confection sugar, and that's malva pudding.
It's essential for any immigrant community to gather around once in a while to celebrate their culture. South African Americans are no different. For the last 10 years, Madiba Restaurant in Brooklyn, New York has provided a cultural space for South African Americans. To celebrate Madiba Restaurant's 10th year anniversary, many South African Americans get together over food, music, dance, and most importantly, fellowship.
We're here to enjoy a lot of the South African traditional food and the excellence of our wonderful cuisine. We have a lot of friends that have been playing at Madiba for many years. We have Tony Cedrus and Bageti Khumalo, Anton Fig, we have Keswa, we have Siduza Kambile. We have so many great artists. It's going to be a wonderful night of dance and music and song. We formed Madiba to really cross that bridge to home, and it's a home away from home. And to really just get everybody that are not only interested in South Africa, but friends of South Africa, people who are homesick to go to South Africa or from. But it's really just we've developed this platform where we just draw all people that love South Africa and Africa, and to come together and to network and enjoy each other's company.
Bakithi Khumalo is a famous South African American musician who has played the bass with many musical geniuses, such as Paul Simon. He was one of the few artists who kick-started Madiba's 10th year anniversary.
I'm a bass player, and I played on a lot of people's records, but most people, they know me as a bass player for Paul Simon. I played on the Graceland, and I came here a long time ago, and it was really great to come here because then there's so many South Africans, so I didn't feel like I was lost in the mix. I just, fit in very well. And I met Madiba, Mark Madiba Restaurant, and since then I never stopped going to Madiba.
If I wake up and cry, I'm never alone. Dance mama, dance mama.
Music was the first thing. People who sing songs to just calm themselves down and just, enjoy themselves. So there's always, the music is like the heart of South Africans, and I'm glad that I'm the part of that, that as well.
As Bakithi Khumalo represents immigrant South Africans, there are also new generations of South Africans born and raised in the U.S. while staying in touch with their artistic heritage. Dan Bailey is a good example of one such South African American musician.
My family's from South Africa, my father from Durban, my mother from Cape Town, and I grew up here in New York, and I play a lot of different kind of music, very much African influenced, a lot of drumming and also reggae and blues and just a lot of different kinds of styles. importance of today's event, it's a celebration really of South African culture and the kind of community that we've built here in New York.
Any South African celebration would be incomplete without the traditional Zulu dance performance. Presented here by the South African dancer Sududuzo Kambali.
For myself, being a South African American, I love this country so much, and I also have a really solid ground and know where I'm from. I'm very fortunate to have, I'm very fortunate speaking for myself to be raised from such two different environments and being able to enjoy both of them simultaneously, and to have little South Africa here in running New York City. It's wonderful for me.
As the celebration continues into the night, South African Americans cherish their new home in the States, remember their past with fond nostalgia, and look to the future with hope. On the next World in America, we meet a people hailing from the southern tip of the African continent, the South African Americans. First, we'll get to know their historical trials and tribulations. Later, we'll taste the delicious cuisine of South Africa, known for its diverse flavors. And finally, we'll move and clap to the rhythms of South African Americans uniting in the Big Apple. All coming up on the next episode of World in America. And a gorgeous inland. It attracts about 10 million tourists each year. Currently, its population is around 50 million. There are 11 languages recognized by the Constitution, highlighting South Africa's diversity and rich history.
When we talk about South African history, what we mean is basically when white colonists arrived in South Africa. 1652. They established the Dutch East India Company, which was a private company that ran colonies for the Dutch, for the Netherlands, established a fort in Cape Town on the South African coast. And from there they expanded, so they ruled South Africa from 1652.
The Republic of South Africa is located on the southernmost tip of the African continent. It neighbors 5 different countries to the north, from Swaziland in the northeast to Namibia in the northwest, the Atlantic and Indian Oceans to the south. It also enclaves the Kingdom of Lesotho. South Africa is a natural beauty, carrying about 1,700 miles of coast.
Dutch settlers who had taken on their own identity in South Africa and who objected to the British ending slavery in in the Cape, I think it was in 1806, and then later abolishing slavery in 1834. So they established their own republics, the Republic of South Africa, they call it the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republiek, the Republic of the Orange Free State, and then also one called Natalia. So they engaged in wars with the British. And of course, this was complicated by the discovery of gold and diamonds at the end of the 19th century. And so the British won that war, incorporated these republics, and formed what is known as the Union of South Africa in 1910. What that basically meant was self-government for whites in South Africa until 1795. And this is a period that is characterized by slavery, by attempts to deny rights to the indigenous people at that point, the Khoi and the San. Increasingly, the Dutch encroached away from the Cape and into the rest of the country. The British then engaged in a war with the Dutch outside of South Africa. This was called the Anglo-Dutch War of 1795 till 1803. The result of that was that the British occupied the Cape and then took over the Cape from 1806 until 1910. During that period, between 1806 and 1910, there were independent African kingdoms, the Zulus, Sothos, etc. There were also independent Afrikaner republics. These were the now